I'm with the author of the white paper, Peter Weigand. For those who may not know you, could you please briefly introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Thanks for visiting our webinar. I'm Peter Weigand. I'm CEO and chairman of Skipping Stone. I've been in the energy business in deregulated markets around the globe, US, Europe, Australia, etc. At one time prior to my consulting, I was the CEO of the largest retailer in the US.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to start with some warm-up questions. So you recently wrote this paper where you believe Japan's power market is moving to what you call 3.0. So what do you mean by 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0?
So 1.0 started back in 2000 when they partially opened for the extra high voltage customers. Then 2.0 started in 2016 when they liberalized the market for all customers. 3.0, in my view, you could see the signs of it before, but it really starting in 2025.
What are some differences between 2.0 and 3.0?
So in 2.0, when the market opened for the retail business, there was virtually very little wholesale market. JEPIX was 1 or 2% of the wholesale supply. So unlike other markets like US and Europe, there was a robust wholesale trading market before there was retail. In Japan, they did it the other way around, where there was very little. Now that 2.0 has grown to where it is, JEPIX is obviously much bigger, 40% or so. And now you have futures markets, more trading companies, influx of international traders. So the dynamics have shifted dramatically since the beginning of 2.0. Now that there's futures, the retailers can offer something different than what everybody does today, which everybody has fuel cost adjustment and many have market-based pricing. But now with hedging, you can offer customers fixed prices. You can offer them caps and collars and floors on market-based pricing. You can offer something partially fixed, partially variable. So you can offer customers very many different things because you have the tools to do the hedging and price discovery around those.
Right. I think we're starting to see those changes, especially, this year and last year. So based on some of the indicators that you mentioned, 3.0 market seems to be characterized by, for hedge style pricing, use of futures and derivatives. And with that comes a higher liquidity in the derivative markets, right? And
right.
As well as more renewable PPAs.
Right. That's something also that's just in infancy in Japan. Corporate PPAs, partially in response to the net zero laws, where large corporates have to do something to reduce their GHG. So between hedging, wholesale markets, trading, volume going way up where it used to be, and PPAs, the whole retail market has shifted. I mean, PPAs were done last year and a couple before that. This year, we're seeing quite a few more PPAs. We've seen some corporates buying fixed price already. So the shift has begun.
With that, I think the audience is now, left with, so what do we expect now and how should we get ready for that? So we'll dive into retail 3.0. My first question is, you expect customer pricing plans to change a lot during 3.0. So why didn't this occur already, and why do you think it will change?
So it didn't occur before this because you couldn't hedge. Most retailers that didn't own generation, their only option was really buy JEPIX, maybe some bilateral supply, but there was really no hedging. I mean, TOCOM is now grown, EEX is much larger. So those hedging tools didn't exist. So that and every other global market I've been involved in, customers really don't like fuel cost adjustment and market-based price plans. They prefer some kind of predictability, if you will, so where they can fix the price per unit, per kWh, or they can at least hedge it with some kind of cap. Now, end users themselves don't do that, but retailers do.
I see. So the market environment has given the ability to do more of that hedge style pricing.
Right. Plus, I think even in Japan, where the LNG price due to the Ukraine war, the prices spiked dramatically, and that pushed quite a few 20% 25% of the retailers pushed them out of business because they just couldn't sustain the losses. Even utilities lost money. So at least the beginnings of risk management and the realization I need to manage price risk and other commodity risk. That was the wake up call, if you will. So you will see volatility again. It's not if it'll happen, it's when it'll happen, because the energy is a global market. So even like there was no obviously political disruption in Japan, but Ukraine war caused the spike halfway around the world.
That actually leads us to the next question about the four major policy changes that you mentioned in the white paper. So how do you evaluate those changes? Do you consider them a good move by the government, or do you think there's room for improvement in any of those to push for the establishment of a healthy 3.0 market?
No, I actually think Medi does a really good job of managing the market and in the market rules. The first one around risk management was a bit of reaction to Ukraine. We saw many retailers go ahead and put a risk policy in place, but a risk policy by itself does not mean you're doing risk management. And there's a whole thing on our website around risk management basics, position management, book structures, and the list goes on. That's a whole other webinar by itself. But that was a good first step to make retailers aware, even utilities aware. Risk management is a requirement if you're in the commodity business, not just electricity, but any commodity business. The second one around the market-based pricing, I kind of view that as a reaction to if you can't hedge, you can push the risk across and have the customer take the risk. So you have this price that's tied to JEPIC spot plus a little management fee, if you will. And it's been okay for a year or two now because there hasn't been the volatility in the spot market like there was with the Ukraine LNG. But when that happens, and I think it will, it's just when, the customers will freak out, if you will. So the third change around the feed-in tariff to feed-in premium was also key because a whole new type of generator, the renewable generator, and also the battery or BESS people who previously built it, got the MEDI price, and sold all of it to the utility, and the utility is required to take it. And the customer really didn't notice a whole lot. You could buy credits, but not many people did. You had the surcharge, so it was kind of paid for in the tariff, if you will. But now renewable developers are out seeking off-takers and PPAs, and corporates are aware of beginning to be aware of how those are structured. There's still a lot of resistance to 15, 20-year terms because end-use customers have never done that before. But that'll change between either generators and their customers. The last piece around the net zero essentially ties back to pushing the renewables and corporate PPAs. I mean, there's other ways to reduce GHG, and the policy doesn't specifically say they have to buy renewables. But ultimately, if you're going to reduce GHG, you can't get there with energy efficiency. So eventually, you're going to turn to renewables. So all those change the market dynamics. And we're also seeing the effect of renewables in the spot market. Certain markets like Kyushu, which is a good example, the price in the afternoon on a sunny day is basically 1 yen or less. So we never saw that before. That's the impact of renewables.
I think by now the audience has a good understanding of how the 3.0 market has come about. And now moving on to the what to expect part. So you stated the new retailers have an opportunity to differentiate themselves and grow before most utilities shift to new hedge style pricing plans. Why do you believe that? And do you have any advice for those new and perhaps smaller retailers?
Sure. So in other markets globally, especially in the low voltage and regular old high voltage, customers tend to buy fixed price. They want that I know what my cost is. I mean, it's tied to usage and that changes, but the ability for retailers to offer that quickly, mostly that will mean probably a billing system modification or maybe even changing billing system to where they can manage different prices for different customers instead of everybody's on fuel cost adjustment. That's a pretty simple standard product. So now you can actually create price plans that fit different demographics and different user types. Utilities can do that too, but utilities tend to have very large CIS or billing systems that are extremely expensive to change out and very expensive to modify to be able to offer these plans. So I expect that utilities will stay on the systems they've got because they still have tariff customers. But I think we'll see over the next 2, 3, 4 years, many of those tariff customers leaving the utility and moving to retailers, which we've seen in other markets. So onto the advice, what I tend to find in my 11 years in Japan is many companies want to see somebody else be successful before they try it. So they're sort of what I call fast followers, but not leading innovation. I think because there's 700 odd retailers, those that are to wait to see how everybody else does, say they don't do anything for a couple of years, they're at risk of basically being blown by. In other words, they losing customers. So to me, as the executive management or senior leadership at a retailer, I would sit down and make a plan of where am I today and what do I need to do to get to 3.0, and then prioritize what those steps might be. Obviously, there's employee education and there's price plan designs. So it's really a reset of the company. I know I went through this from my own company from 2.0 to 3.0. And the reason we went from number 28 or 30 or whatever we were to number 1 is we adopted before the rest of the retailers. So I think having a management plan and acceptance that's going to change and coming up with a game plan of how to make the changes and what they need to be and what that looks like. And we can certainly help if people want to, what is the roadmap and how do I get there? Then it's a matter of, budget versus time and cost to do things.
Thank you. Next question. You indicate the consolidation of retailers will happen as the number of competitors will shrink. I believe we haven't seen this trend yet in Japan. I know we saw a little bit of a drop during the Ukraine crisis, but now we still have more than 700 companies. So why do you believe it will happen, and when do you think it will happen?
So you're correct. Ukraine was more of going out of business than it was consolidation. Consolidation means one retailer buys the customers of a different retailer. And we've seen this in every other global market, Australia, UK, US, etc. So the companies that adopt 3.0 early, they'll find in many cases they need a bigger customer base to justify the cost of this. So acquiring customers in Japan is expensive. It's still very door-to-door agents, that sort of thing. So if you can acquire a retailer with, call it 10, 20, maybe 50,000 customers, who realistically are going to struggle to afford to change all this without additional investment, they may be interested in selling their book of customers so that the customers that get larger will do that as much by acquiring other businesses as they will by organically acquiring customers. I know in my own case, once we started adopting 3.0, we did 9 acquisitions in 2 years. That helped us grow to number 1. So it's still early in Japan. I think with 700 odd retailers, let's call it 600 active ones, that's too many for this market. I can see in, call it 3 or 4 years, that shrinking to half or so.
Regarding the last point of the section, volatility of the wholesale market. Everywhere in the world is a matter when, and as you said earlier too. So you often use the ARCA case as the example of the powder keg effect. And currently, many retailers adopt market-based price plans, but after the huge spike in Texas, this plan became illegal in Texas, right? So do you
Correct.
think the same could happen in Japan?
I'm not sure it'll become illegal or not, but what happened in ERCOT, many retailers had the market-based price plan, very similar to the Japan plan, because it was the easy way to hedge. You didn't really need to hedge with futures. The customers took the risk. Then when in the ERCOT case, it was a deep freeze of weather. The weather was much colder than normal. which could happen in Japan, or it could be much hotter than normal, or it could be a supply chain disruption of LNG like we saw with Ukraine. Different reasons for that. But when it spiked, customers' bills doubled, tripled, or even higher. So in many cases, they had trouble paying for that because it was way out of budget. So accounts receivable and bad debt grew. But more importantly, they complained to the politicians. This doesn't seem fair, because most customers don't really understand how electricity is priced and how commodities work. I mean, their idea is you go hit the light switch and it works. That's kind of it. And then they get a bill. And most of them don't read the bill anyway. They don't read all the line items. They read how much should I pay? So you really don't notice how much it costs until it really balloons. So in the ERCOT case, and this has happened in Australia, it's happened in the UK. In the UK, they put a price cap on retailers. When the wholesale price went above the price cap, they just, they lost almost a half their retailers. In Texas, the politicians simply made that price plan illegal. So everybody had to switch to, most fixed to some kind of fixed price, or if it had a market-based price, it had a cap. So it wouldn't go above a certain price. I can't predict whether it'll become illegal in Japan or not, but I can predict when it happens, because it will, that the customers are very upset and the politicians will get involved, and they'll make instant reactions to make the voters happy that they're doing something. That's what happened in Texas. That's what happened in the UK.
So now we're going to talk about requirements for Retail 3.0 success. You highlight that there are three primary success drivers: cost to acquire, cost to serve, and commodity margin management. So that sounds like a lot to do. Does this mean this is a good time to revisit the entire business process and systems?
Those three areas: cost to serve, cost to acquire, and commodity risk management. Those are the three pillars of the retail business anyway. So cost to acquire is simply how much is it cost to acquire customers. So on average, I've seen prices in Japan where you're paying 2 years of margin to acquire a customer. Then if the customer leaves, you lose. So driving that cost down, and there's many ways to do that, is very important, because ultimately this is a commodity market, and ultimately price is what customers care about. You can have shopping points, you can have, whatever types of other soft programs, and that gets a little bit of interest, but ultimately it comes down to price. So in order to be competitive and still make money, getting that cost to acquire customers down is really critical. This is why buying existing customer books at below what it costs you to say, let's say below door-to-door cost, becomes prudent as a way to do that. Cost to serve is basically the back office and the operations and billing and customer care and all that. So that one, the way to manage that, obviously the more customers, the lower per customer cost, but more importantly is to automate those processes so there's very little human intervention from enrollment to bill and collect. So I see, and this is not unusual, I see many Japan retailers look like UK, US retailers in the early days, where they solve that by hiring more people. So that's inefficient. It creates errors. If there's more errors, the tendency is hire more people. And at some point, the back office and cost to acquire, you have to charge more margin. So getting that straight. And then the commodity risk is really the simpler of the three, believe it or not, because that's price plans, hedging, forecasting. Those are things people are doing some of already. The cost to acquire and cost to serve is the key to making money.
You said cost to serve, cost to acquire will be more important.
It's hard to say which is more important, because it's kind of like, picture a three-legged stool. One leg is cost to acquire, one leg is cost to serve, one leg is commodity risk management. If one's a lot shorter than the other, the stool falls over. So it's not like, okay, I'm going to focus all my initial attention on cost to acquire. Well, it's, to me, where you start is you come up with a roadmap covering all three, and you prioritize which projects can you do first. You obviously can't do them all at once. And I think in my case, it took me a little over 2 years to implement all these things. So it wouldn't surprise me in Japan, it takes that long too. I happen to start with commodity risk management because managing commodity margins to me was the first priority. So by managing commodity margins, it caused me to start shifting price plans because I found subsets of my customers that were not profitable. So the goal is not how many customers I have. The goal is how much money did I make? So those customers that I was losing money that I figured out from commodity risk management, I went back with price increases, to where I could make some money. Now I lost about half those customers that resisted the price increase, and competitors were selling it for less. And I couldn't fix competitors selling it for less, but I could fix my own margin. My next thing in my ticket order, and this is not my recommendation how to do it. I then moved into cost to acquire. I was using door to door for low voltage, and I had a large sales force going after high and extra high voltage. That was a very expensive way to do it. I changed to where I used more channels that were working on a commission base, and I used brokers for the extra high voltage that were also commission based, so that I was paying more for customers on a success basis than I was on a overhead basis. Because, for example, door to door or Salesforce costs money whether they sell anything or they don't. So my next step, and because I had my commodity risk margin, I was making more money. The more expensive part in my case was I changed the billing and back office system that took about a year to implement, but that allowed me to automate workflows from customer sign up or the enrollment process through the switching meter data into the forecasting system and the billing and customer care. Now in customer care, part of my reduction in cost was I moved to a bit more customer self-service so that I made my website, my system easier for customers to figure out what was my bill. Maybe I have simple questions so that I could have my customer service reps focus more on customers with problems and issues to solve that typically are not done online. But so in my case, cost to serve was was the third after the first two, but that's not a magic formula. It's just how I did it.
By now, we all know that all these transition measures certainly require new systems, right? So from customer pricing automation to risk management, advanced billing and customer care, and what you just mentioned, cost to acquire, cost to serve, I think there are a lot that can do with the system change as well. So, are there any one-size-fits-all systems that can do all that? And if so, are there any of them available in Japan? Or would it be better even to build in-house system as a retailer reforms its strategy and operational flow?
I've seen many when I took over the company I ran called Commerce Energy. They had an in-house software development function, and it was a never-ending budget request and a never-ending list of things they wanted built. And I kind of decided, are we a retail energy company or are we a software company? So developing your own software is basically an endless amount of money spent, and you don't get the benefit of other customers' viewpoints. So I'm a big believer in buying systems and modifying them to fit. Are there systems one fit all? No. Typically, at a minimum, you need two systems: the back office billing, customer care, which also can automate the customer acquisition process, not the function itself, but the enrollment, the sign up, the pricing, and all that can be automated. Then commodity risk management is typically a risk management system that gets into position reporting, hedging, um, sometimes scheduling separate. But generally, there's a risk system and there's a operating system, and then tied around those are data systems like weather data or price history data. So you pull data into those two core systems to run analytics and do decision support. So are they in Japan? Yes, there's risk management systems in Japan. There's some that are extremely expensive that only the really big companies can afford. And there's others that are much more modest, but still not that cheap, that are for the medium-sized retailer that do, I believe, most of the functions you need. In fact, my opinion is these big, expensive risk systems do way more than the Japanese market requires, because it gets into all kinds of, FX and all kinds of things that don't matter, in my opinion. On the billing customer care automation, there's 2 or 3 systems I'm aware of in Japan that came in from other international markets that were designed around how they work, that they were adapted for Japan. And I know there's obviously quite a few operating billing systems that are Japanese based. I'm not that familiar with that many of them. I do know that some companies are shifting back office systems because the ones they have don't do 3.0 type workflows.
To excel at any of the success drivers, you say that retailers have to be proficient in the trading arena. So, what are the ways for retailers to get familiar or even proficient in trading?
Yeah, let me be clear. I'm not saying retailers have to be trading. I'm saying they have to be proficient to understand trading. So I'm not saying a retailer all of a sudden has to start trading futures and spot market beyond their load requirements. But by understanding that, what happens in many other markets, those retailers then can go to the trading firms, which there's many of, and negotiate things like caps. They can negotiate support for fixed price because they understand what they need and how it works. So you can hedge a low voltage book, let's call it price caps, without ever doing a derivative yourself. You can buy that product, if you will, from many other trading firms. So I'm not saying retailers should be trading. Some will, and some it makes sense for. But others, need to understand it. So you can do that, a combination of education and simply sitting down with trading companies and say, look, this is what I'm looking to do. How can you support me and what would that cost? So there's a bit of discovery to do that.
So, you mentioned that a handful of retailers who seized the three key factors early dominate the US retail market.
Right.
So, I think this is a future that Japanese retailers might still have difficulty imagining at this point.
So looking at UK, US, Australia markets for retail, every one of those now has a big five, big six, something like that, retailers that truly dominate that market. All of them grew up early into adopting 3.0, getting systems, investing in the future, and all of them rolled up or acquired books of customers from smaller retailers that either chose not to do that or simply couldn't afford to do that, one or the other. So I know that's hard to see in Japan because there's very little M&A activity in retail. Now, what I think it'd be bigger than the big five or six in Japan, simply because there's more customers available in Japan than anywhere else in the world. You've got 86 odd million meters you can sign up. That far exceeds the US by 3 times in the UK and Australia. So it would not surprise you there's a top 10, 15, maybe even 20 in Japan. And then smaller niche players that have got some kind of niche. Maybe it's maybe they appeal to the foreign crowd, or they appeal to the expats or something. So it's a little bit of a niche because they do something different. But I don't think that consolidation become very apparent for at least 4 or 5 years, but I do think so.
Then now we'll move on to the final question. It kind of went by really fast, but to those who aren't still convinced about the 3.0 market shift, what do you say to them?
Well, what I say is if you're not going to change, you're not going to adopt it, then we'll probably be knocking on your door in a couple years, see if you want to sell your company.
So,
I'm in Japan on a frequent basis. I've been
mhm.
to Japan easily over 100 times, kind of my second home, if you will. For anybody watching that, if you would like to have a meeting in person or a video meeting, happy to do that. We have Risa and others in our company that can do the translation if required. Because unfortunately, my Japanese is so off, I don't use it. So, but happy to schedule a meeting of some sort if people want to explore this further. All right. Thanks for watching.
皆様、こんにちは。スキッピングストーン日本代表の奥山です。本日のセッションいかがだったでしょうか。リテール 3.0 ホワイトペーパーには、予想を上回る反響があり、多くの方々からご関心をお寄せいただきました。今回のセミナーにも多くの方々にご参加いただいております。これまで弊社では電力市場のリスク管理やヘッジ、トレーディングの重要性、必要性について積極的に情報発信をしてまいりました。これらのテーマに対する皆様の関心やご理解が一段と高まっていることを実感しております。当社へのお問い合わせも増えてきております。年長付き料金メニューでの値引き合戦、あるいは市場変動転嫁型メニューでどれだけ安いマージンで提供できるかといったコモディティ化した競争に対する限界を感じる小売業者様も増えてきております。一方、これら競争に生き残り、また成長するため、他社との差別化を図るためには、リスク管理、ヘッジ、トレーディングが必要であることの認識が広がっていることは、いい傾向にあると当社では評価しております。欧米の重化市場でも起こりましたように、顧客のリスク低減と利便性の向上を図る一方、自社のリスク低減も図り、収益性も確保する商品開発や、戦略の構築、アセット運用のノウハウの蓄積が生きる残る鍵となってまいります。遅きに死することにならないよう、本日のセミナーが準備のきっかけとなれば幸いです。これからも当社は積極的に発信、啓蒙を続けていきたいと思っております。今後ともよろしくお願いします。ご視聴いただき誠にありがとうございました。